Welcome to the Sixth Wheels Consulting Podcast, dialoguing disability and discussing difference, inclusion, and all abilities in today's world. Now here are your hosts, Matthew Shapiro and Bob Nolly.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Dr. Bob Nolly with Matthew Shapiro, and you have found your way back to episode 3 of the Sixth Wheels Consulting Podcast. So glad you found your way here. Previously on Six Wheels, what we were talking about was recapping Matthew's trip to the far side of the planet, to Paris, Amsterdam, South Africa, and we talked about the work involved, the planning it takes to get there. But Matthew was just about to tell us what one of the most touching, meaningful moments was that he found on this trip. So let's pick it up right back there, and with Matthew telling us about this encounter. Here we go.
One thing that was really cool when we were in South Africa, we got to visit a school for people with special needs. And so with my background in doing a lot of youth initiative work and working with youth like I have done in my career, we were able, it was nice to be able to sort of see how they deal with education and special education overseas. And we actually, before we went in and met with the students, we met with the headmaster, and she talked about a lot of the same challenges that we deal with in the States when it comes to disability, of like lack of transportation, people with disabilities staying in their homes and not being out in public, lack of education. A lot of those same things that we talk about in the States were a lot of the same issues that were happening over in South Africa. And so I just found that to be really interesting, and it immediately made me sort of put on my advocacy hat and my consulting hat and sort of in my mind say, what can we do to make this more of a global issue so that it's not just a United States issue and a South Africa issue, but it's a worldwide issue where we can try and resolve some of these systemic challenges that it appears most countries are facing when it comes to people with disabilities and best serving people with disabilities. So I just thought that was interesting to hear that from her perspective. The school children were signing for us. They were using sign language. They were getting prepared for a competition that they had to do. It was like for like choirs and acting and all kinds of stuff. And when I tell you it was probably the most amazing choir I've ever heard, that probably doesn't even do it justice. Like these students, like you would have thought you were in like the Sistine Chapel or like, in a really nice church, hearing these songs that these students were singing. And it just, I got a little choked up when they were singing, just because it was so moving to hear them sing. And it was, the school was solely for people and young people with disabilities. So it was really cool to see that. And one of the other things that I really enjoyed about that whole experience, so my chair does a lot of really cool things. It like raises up and down so that I can like be at eye level with certain people, and it tilts back and it reclines and it does all this cool stuff. So as I was leaving, I decided to raise my chair up to show these students that like my chair is pretty cool. It does amazing stuff. And the looks that they were giving me was just, they were in complete and utter awe, because they were, the students who were using wheelchairs at the school were in manual chairs, right? And so even if they saw the most generic power chair, they still would have been in awe. But this is a chair that, like I said, raises up and down, tilts back, has lights on it. And so their eyes got so big and they were in so much awe that it was cool to be able to share that with them. And I was glad I was able to go to the school for sure.
My advice to folks that are traveling abroad that don't do it regularly is to just try to immerse yourself in the local culture. It's wonderful to go to Paris and eat great food and see the cafe scene and go to the Eiffel Tower, or go to Italy and visit the Colosseum and eat pasta and all of that. Or even go to the Caribbean and go to a resort and you sit in the sun. But to be able to really meet and spend time with local people that live there and allow yourself to be immersed in their culture really has the opportunity to bring some enlightening, if not life-changing moments. But what you did there with the others you were in South Africa on the tour with and the folks you met at the school, I don't doubt for a second that you had some pure moments of inspiration there.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Like, I certainly hope that our group and me and the other people that they interacted with that day. Unfortunately, we didn't get a whole lot of time to interact with the students, but I hope that they saw all of us and could use us as if they can do it, why can't I do it, kind of thing. And that's really what why we're doing this podcast, or why we're trying to enlighten people, just to, again, have conversations and open people's eyes to different things like this. And, we've just got to have more conversations around these topics as it relates to disability. And I'm going to pivot back to something really quick too, because one of the things I forgot to mention with airlines is that we're protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act here in the States, but airlines actually have their own legislation that they kind of work through and live by. It's called the Air Carrier Access Act. And before I was doing travel and before I had been to a couple conferences recently, I didn't know that this piece of legislation existed. And it mandates how many number of seats. If you have a certain number of seats in your plane, a certain number of them have to have arms that move so people can transfer. They have to be certain sizes so that you can fit equipment under, all kinds of stuff that like I said, before I was traveling overseas, I didn't know that this piece of legislation existed. And so, do I think that this is a good piece of legislation, but as some of the challenges that we've talked about with damaging wheelchairs, and again, not calling out anyone in particular, but damaging wheelchairs or hurting passengers if they're doing the transfers and things, we have to do a better job of making sure that things don't happen when we're traveling, right? Because again, if my chair breaks down and I'm in Paris, I'm kind of in trouble, right? Because, if you lose your luggage, you can, buy new clothes in Paris or whatever. But if my chair breaks, I am literally stuck to the point where, my parents would probably have to push me in manual mode, and nobody really wants to try and navigate a foreign country while also pushing a 400-pound wheelchair. Now, none of that happened except for the last leg when we were finally home in DC. So it really wasn't a problem at the time. But, I just want people to be aware of that there is legislation in place. But I do think we have to do a better job of supporting our passengers and our people with disabilities who want to travel. Because, again, because of all the damage and all of the horror stories that they've heard, I think it prevents people with disabilities from traveling. And I, for one, don't want people missing out on tremendous opportunities in the States and in other countries.
So when you got home, you felt what?
When I got home, I felt a little bit angry because my chair was broken at the time. I felt relief because I was home. I love to travel, and I'm not, again, saying any of this to discourage people from traveling, but traveling is hard, right? And it's hard for people who are able-bodied, but it's also really hard for people who have disabilities because, again, if you don't have your equipment or something is maybe not 100% right, you make it work and you enjoy the travel and you enjoy the trip, but you also are relieved when you get home and you're back in one piece and you're back in an environment where you know all your accommodations are and you know you can be successful. But it is, again, I really want to stress the fact that I'm not telling people with disabilities not to travel. That's not at all what I'm doing. But what I am doing is giving an honest and clear experience of what my travel is like. Now, other people with disabilities may have better or worse experiences. This is just my experience. But I just want to give that full picture. And I really, really want to encourage people, all people, those with disabilities and without, to travel so that they can see amazing things. Like when I was in Paris, I got to see the Mona Lisa. And we went into the art gallery and saw the Mona Lisa, and I got a really nice picture with it, or near it, so to speak. And we went to all these amazing art galleries, and we ate all this amazing food, and met people from all over the United States who were with us on this safari. And if I wasn't willing to take some opportunities and take this trip, and if I didn't have the support system that I have, and I also want to mention that I'm very lucky to have a very supportive support system that's like, yeah, let's go to South Africa, or yeah, let's go to Paris, or yeah, let's go to Amsterdam, and do it, then you're missing out on, tremendous opportunities, like you said, to just experience culture, and experience new ways of life.
It does call for some planning. It calls for some perseverance, but the rewards have the potential to greatly outweigh that effort that you need there.
Yeah, and I haven't even touched on Amsterdam, but that was probably my favorite place that we visited. Not for the reasons that I think our listeners would think, but Amsterdam was probably the most open-minded country that we visited, in terms of accessibility, in terms of, it's kind of this whole idea, and we had a lot of debates about this when we were on our trip, my family and I. It was kind of like this whole idea of the whole collectivistic culture approach versus the individualistic culture approach. And obviously in the States, we live very individualistically, where we are concerned about me, myself, and I, to a certain extent, some of our family, but it's very individually driven. And when you're over in Europe, it's very much a collectivistic culture where it's like me and you together, or we're in it for all. And it really stood out to me from an accessibility standpoint, because they really went above and beyond in a lot of situations to make things more accessible and more inclusive. And I've got two examples that I'll share that sort of illustrate that.
So do that, because when you say Amsterdam, to me, first I see the canals, and then I've kind of paced around them, the narrow sidewalks and crossways that you might have seen, in Paris as well. But sure. I see very narrow and difficult situations for you there.
So it still was very narrow, but the stoplights lasted a little bit longer, so I was able to get across streets in enough time. Two of my most favorite things that happened in Amsterdam. So we knew we wanted to take a boat canal cruise, and we were very skeptical as to how are they going to get my 400-pound wheelchair on this boat, and how are they going to make this work? In certain situations, they have ramps for you, but sometimes those ramps are very steep, and you can get down on the boat, but getting up would be a very, very much a challenge. So going into that morning when we were taking the boat canal cruise, I was very skeptical. But they were like, don't worry about it. We've done this before. We gotcha. So we get on the pier, and they're like, we got to go get your boat. We have an accessible boat that we need to get for you. So our boat captain brings his boat around, and he says, come to the back of the boat. And so I'm thinking, okay, how are they going to do this? And all of a sudden, so the captain's in the boat, and then he starts to raise up. And so, long story short, there was a lift on the boat that all I had to do was roll my chair onto this platform, and it lowered me onto the boat.
Oh, that's perfect.
It was probably one of the easiest things we did while we were on the trip. But that's another example of, like, you know, making it work. And I am an American, and I hate to sort of call out our country like this, but, like, I don't think that's something that you would see in the States because, you know, it costs too much money or it is too challenging to do that, and we want to just do the bare minimum of what's required. But, you know, that's one example of, like, them kind of going above and beyond to make things fully accessible and fully inclusive for everyone. The other example that I always share with people when they ask me about the trip is, so I'm somebody, when I need to use the restroom, I need assistance. So I always need to go into the restroom with somebody in order to do what I need to do. And so often, you know, I'm with my mom or you know, whatever, and there's always that awkward of, like, does she go into the men's room, or do I go into the women's room? And so oftentimes, like, I'll end up going into the women's room in the States, and, you know, you'll get the looks from the women of, like, you realize you're in the women's room, and I'm like, yes, ma'am, I realize that, but I need assistance to go to the restroom, blah, blah, blah. So you're always looking for family restrooms or single stall restrooms in certain places because it makes it easier for an attendant to help the individual with the disability. In Amsterdam in particular, literally in all of your big buildings, like your hotel rooms, your some of your churches, some of your other places, not like your hole in the wall places like you'd find in, you know, in like restaurants and things, but like your bigger buildings, there was always four things. There was always a men's room, a women's room, a baby changing and breastfeeding station, and there was always, always, always a family restroom. So I was just giddier than heck because literally everywhere I could go, I could use the restroom and not have to worry about finding a facility that worked. And the perfect example of the restroom is we were walking around one day and I needed to use the restroom, and so we went into this, I guarantee you, probably 300-year-old church, and they're like, oh yeah, we have a bathroom, like, you're good. And so you go into this 300, like, really old church. I don't know if it was actually 300 years, but it was a guess. But it's a really old church, and so you're skeptical as to whether the bathroom will work. But sure enough, you go in the bathroom, there's a family, you know, there's a single stall restroom, and you got grab bars in there, you got enough space to maneuver your wheelchair, and this is in a very, very old retrofitted building. And so I asked myself the question, well, if they can do that in Amsterdam, what's the excuse as to why we can't do that in the States? You know, we always use the argument of, like, this is grandfathered in, we don't have to build this, or you know, this is too old of a building, we don't have to do this. And to me, that's a bunch of malarkey. To use a Joe Biden term, I guess you could say. And so it was always making me think. And then the other amazing thing about these family restrooms was we had a family restroom in our hotel that we stayed at. When we were in Amsterdam, we stayed at like a DoubleTree Suites or whatever. And there was a family restroom on the like the lobby area of the hotel. And I kid you not, when you go into this family restroom, it is literally the size of an entire hotel room. And I was just, like, thrilled to bits because I was able, like, you could probably have gotten 3 or 4 wheelchairs in there and still not had a problem. But we would never take up that amount of real estate in the States to allow for that much room for a family style restroom. But I just thought it was very interesting, the different approaches that the different countries had when it comes to disability as compared to the United States. And, that was one of the big reasons I wanted to do this trip, was from a consulting standpoint, sort of see how other countries deal with disability. And I can tell you, after going to Paris and South Africa and Amsterdam, I kind of have the itch to move to Europe, because I think my life would be a little bit easier there.
No doubt, no doubt. Hey, I know people that are listening want to, perhaps if there's a way to see some of the sites you saw there, because we always love those pictures, and
Sure.
perhaps see some things that represent those challenges. Are you going to post things on in the social media, or?
I will certainly do that if that is something that our listeners would certainly be.
I would certainly go through that. Where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so great question. So I have all of my Six Wheels Consulting accounts. I'm on Twitter at 6W Consulting. I'm on Facebook. If you look up Six Wheels Consulting on Facebook, I'm on Google Plus and YouTube. I have Six Wheels Consulting things everywhere. And you can also find all of that information and all of my social media pages on sixwheelsconsulting.com. Again, that's using the number 6. So it's 6, the number 6, wheelsconsulting.com. And I'll be sure to try and post some pictures up there on my blog, or post them on social media. And I'd love to hear our audience's perspectives on some of those pictures too, and just get some of their thoughts on travel as well.
We'll get some comments from them for sure. That would be excellent.
Sure, we would love to do that. We like we said in our intro video or intro episode, we want this to be an interactive program. And we really don't want it to be just Bob and I talking. So we'll do a better job of promoting what each new episode is going to be in the future, so that we can get some audience feedback.
Yeah, we don't want them to think we're making this up as we go along.
No, we're too professional for that, Bob. We're too professional for that.
Hey, you had some other news about a book.
Yeah, so one of the things I forgot to do on our intro episode, I plugged all my social media, I plugged the podcast, and I'm now an author too, and I was very fortunate enough with my public speaking work. I work with a coach who helps me with my public speaking, and about a year ago, he had a training session where he brought all of his clients in to really hone in on becoming better speakers. And one of the things that came out of that was a book. And so both my mom and I were fortunate enough to write a chapter for the book. The book is called Infinite Inspirations, Creative and Daring Responses to Life's Challenges. So you can find the book. I have another website that's my speaking world. That can be found at MatthewShapirospeaking.com. And that's on the website. There's a shop there. You can order the book online. If you're interested in hearing about my chapter, is about my experience with a program that I think we touched on in the intro called No Barriers, where I really started to get out of my comfort zone and try new things. My mom's chapter is all about kind of this phrase that she uses that is there but for the grace of God go I. And I think I'm going to kind of dive into more detail on that in our next episode, which I think you and I have tentatively figured out that it's going to cover stigma as it relates to disability. So I'm going to save that story for that episode. But if people are interested in the book, you can order it on the website. I greatly appreciate it. Want to get the book out there more, want to get the messages, not only from me and my mom, but the 11 other authors that were part of this great project. We want to get their messages out, and we want to sell some books if we can. So again, if everyone's interested, they can either find me on social media and ask me about it. They can message me on my Six Wheels website, or they can go to my other website, which is MatthewShapirospeaking.com.
And perhaps even we can link them up to the book on the Facebook page.
We can absolutely do that as well. I've done that recently as well. So lots of ways that you can find the book, lots of ways that you can find this new podcast. Bob and I are so excited to be sharing these stories with you guys and doing these episodes. We've gotten some pretty decent feedback, but we're still trying to grow the audience as we're doing our episodes. This was our first real episode, I would say. And, this was our first topic-related episode. So hopefully our listeners took something away from it or learned something a little bit more about travel that they maybe didn't already know, or at the very least found out that they wanted to travel to Paris, Amsterdam, or South Africa themselves. And, just hope that we can start dialogues through this podcast. And we want to hear from you. We want you involved in the podcast process and or offering any comments or questions that you might have. So we're, just very grateful to have you guys as listeners. Our next episode will be coming out in a couple of weeks. But as I may have mentioned, we think that next episode is going to be all about stigma and disability. And so we hope that you will join us for that conversation and give us any thoughts that you might have on that topic. And just continue to help us grow this podcast, because we really think it's a unique opportunity to have some really interesting and unique conversations about different topics as it relates to disability. So I just want to thank everyone for listening tonight and today. Whenever you are listening to this, it might be during the day, it might be at night, who knows?
Yeah, the stigma episode may already be there.
Yeah, the stigma episode is probably already there if you go check it out now. Again, just thank you to everybody, and please like the podcast, like all the social media pages, get involved in this process, because we really want you to be a part of it. And just thank you very much for listening, and hope you enjoyed the episode.
So I'll let that be the parting word there. So you have been listening to episode 3, ladies and gentlemen, of the Six Wheels Consulting Podcast. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, anywhere you find us, and find Matthew on social media